gonna take some putting back together when I'm done with you.
Furi is predominantly a combat game. You got a sword, a gun, a dodge, and you have enemies to kill. Those enemies, however, are only bosses, with precise attacks you have to dodge or parry, and with huge flashes of color that cover up most of the screen, reminiscent of a bullet hell shmup. Those aspects of the game are done very well, but it's not what I want to focus on. Outside of those boss fights, Furi does exactly one more thing. It's a walking simulator with weird camera angles, weirder locales, and there's a bunny mumbling incoherent abstract exposition at you. And saying that out loud actually sounds pretty damn cool, and for the most part it is, but my problem is how those two, the combat and the rest, how they connect, or really how they don't. You know ebb and flow, relief, and climax? You can't have action all the time, you need something to break it apart, usually over time. But in Furi, it's all or nothing. You have crazy combat that might as well be yelling at you full blast, "This is awesome action, ah!" But then you have a dead calm. The in-between fight parts are so dreary and actually require zero interaction. Yes, you can walk around yourself, but there's nothing to find, maybe a few small things, but nothing to really interact with. Your best option is to press A and watch the character walk to the next fight on its own. Even that tiny bit of interaction, walking around, even that's taken out. One button press and then zero input is required as you make your way between fights, enjoying the scenes and sometimes hearing the bunny talk. I'm not angry that this option of automated walking exists, it's a good thing when people want to avoid aimlessly walking around, but it begs the question, why not go a step further and just get to the next fight, if that's the purpose of the option anyways. The contrast here is too strong. When you go from 0 to 100, or, well, in this case from 100 to 0 after a fight, it just feels disjointed. You can even see it in the movement. You're so fast when you fight a boss, and so walking simulator slow when you're not. Some of these walks take upward of 4 minutes with only a few sentences from the bunny man about how much you should kill the next boss and everyone is evil and remember how angry you are. At some point it becomes a little samey and redundant. I get it. Kill the things. I was a prisoner. I want out. You want out. I get it. Stop talking. Let me just get there. What I'm trying to say is that I'm missing a middle. I'm not asking for progression. I think the combat and core skills are fantastic, and I could spend days just doing that if you put different challenges in front of me. I don't need to level up or use a skill point, and I'm not asking for any currency system or items. But I need something more, and those are options. Other options include actual levels with things to do in them, even if it's mostly combat. You know, with cool enemies and different scenarios, basically a game. When it's just the bosses, it feels a bit hollow. The story is fine, but it doesn't hold on its own. There's something to be done with environmental storytelling, but it's mostly camera angles and abstract stuff. Yes, the craziness in the narration does some work, but it's never driven home due to the lack of interaction. These sections might as well just be cutscenes, but they don't do a very good job as just movies. It's a monologue and a visual experience, and then you throw me right back into the action. Whatever hold or connection I managed to acquire is gone when I have to focus on murdering the next boss for 15 minutes. Without spoiling much, the story talks about the ramifications of your actions, but the only actions you ever take are fighting bosses that spout out presumptuous slogans again and again. Really, repeating voice lines when trying the same boss for the third time gets kind of annoying, but I digress. The interactivity in this interactive experience is very limited, and so I managed to connect just to that one interactive part, the crazy action part, and that's all the game is, all the time. That's not a bad thing, especially with such fantastic combat, but if you want me to connect to your world in a different way, please let me interact with it more. Let me live in it. One aspect that does help bring the world to life is the lovely soundtrack. If there's one thing that's memorable outside of combat, it's the music when you're walking around, and when you're dashing through projectiles and deflecting hits, the music does get the blood pumping. It's actually good enough to buy without ever playing the game. With all that said, I do want to spend some time talking combat. Probably the only issue here is when you screw up enough and have to repeat the entire boss fight from the start. It could get a bit tedious and frustrating, but it is usually your fault, and having learned their patterns, you should get through it pretty quickly when you try again. There are times when taking a hit removes most, if not all, of your HP bar, but even in those rare cases, you always have a shot to regain life when you parry correctly, and you do have a couple of HP bars to start with. There's room for error, just not a ton of error, and if you die, that bunny will cheer you back up for another try. The game does a great job combining close quarters twitch combat and bullet hell-like sections where the whole screen is lasers and damaging waves. It looks cool and plays great. There are a few parts here and there that feel a bit annoying, like how you can fall off the ledge some of the time, but mostly the feel is fantastic. If anything, Furi proves that it does pay off to focus on one thing above all else. In one sense, I want to praise how accurate the game is with what it does. It's set out to do one very specific thing, have awesome combat, and it does it very well. But the end product leaves me at a loss. I want more. More than anything, I think that's a compliment. I want more of this world, this gameplay, this concept. I want to see a full game behind it. Stick to your convictions and stay with the core combat, but expand upon it and try to apply it in different ways. A great point of comparison here is Hyper Light Drifter. They both have similar mechanics, but that game feels more wholesome, because it is. These games really are similar in a lot of ways, though the direction taken is different. Hyper Light Drifter wanted to have a complete standard game experience, and so it has some progression, proper levels, achievements, and everything else you'd expect out of such a game. Furi wanted amazing boss fights and super tight controls. Hyper Light Drifter has great controls, but in my opinion Furi is unbeatable in that department, and undoubtedly has better boss fights. But yeah, Hyper Light Drifter feels more like a complete game, because once again, it is. Another game to consider is Titan Souls, the one-arrow boss rush game. This is a bit farther away in terms of mechanics, as the bosses there are mostly puzzles, but the different approach to the world is interesting. In Titan Souls, though a boss fight usually takes about a minute, it could take 5 or 10 seconds. One mistake is a death and you have to start over, so consider trying and retrying bosses repeatedly. With that type of action, the relief comes in exploring the world that's mostly open to you. There's also the element when one boss is too difficult, you can always go to a different area and try to find other bosses to fight. Exploration, though the only thing you really find are other bosses, is still part of the game, and it adds another layer to the world that the game creates, something that Furi lacks. All in all, I like Furi a lot, and I can totally recommend it if you're into these type of challenging games. And now that I know they can make the type of combat I love, I'll be keeping a close eye on the developers, the game bakers, seeing what they cook up next. Sorry, it's just a really good setup. And, okay, I'm sorry, I'm done. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.